The massacres at the Sabra and Chatila Palestinian refugee camps were a turning point in the international perception of Israel. From 1948 through the 1970s, Israel had been seen as David to its neighbor's Goliath. That had all changed. Israel was now the aggressor. Israel was now Goliath. And the massacres here in these Palestinian refugee camps served to emphasize that changed position of power. Soon after, the Israeli judiciary, led by the Chief Justice of the Israeli Supreme Court, Kahan, began an investigation into the massacres, and in February 1983 released their report. According to the Kahan Commission, quote, determined that the massacre at Sabra and Chatila was carried out by a phalangist unit, acting on its own, but its entry was known to Israel. No Israeli was directly responsible for the events which occurred in the camps, but the Commission asserted that Israel had indirect responsibility for the massacre since the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, held the area. Prime Minister Begin was found responsible for not exercising greater involvement and awareness in the matter of introducing the phalangists into the camps. Defense Minister Sharon was found responsible for ignoring the danger of bloodshed and revenge when he approved the entry of the phalangists into the camps, as well as not taking appropriate measures to prevent bloodshed. The Commission recommended that Defense Minister Sharon resign, that the Director of Military Intelligence not continue in his post, and other senior officers be removed. Menachem Begin had come to power in 1977. He was the first prime minister from the recently formed Likud party, which we discussed in an earlier lecture. The Likud then allied with the Christian militias, led prior to his assassination by Bashir Gemayel. These militias, also known as the Phalange, or Phalangists, were in some ways not unlike other authoritarian movements elsewhere in the world in the 20th century, such as, in particular, the situation in Spain during the 1930s, in which Franco took control of the country with a not inconsequential aid from one Adolf Hitler. The Phalanges were a right-wing, conservative organization that viewed the PLO and the Palestinians in general as their enemy. Though the Kahan Commission was rather blunt in its assessment of the situation in the Chatila and Sabra camps, the Commission did not recommend that Israel leave Lebanon. Therefore, between 1982 and 1985, what we see in the southern half of Lebanon is an Israeli occupation. The map on the left side of the screen is a variety of colors. It's a variety of colors because Lebanon is a patchwork of ethnic identities. In the dark green here on the map, here in the Bekaa Valley and also dominating southern Lebanon, we find Shia Muslims. However, there are also large populations here in the blue area and in the pink, areas which are dominated by Christian sects. Eastern Orthodox, but Christian nonetheless. Finally, here the northern part, in light green, demarcates territory that's dominated by Sunni Muslims. As you can see, the amount of territory that the Shias control much greater than the Sunnis. Though there is no group that's an absolute majority here between Sunni, Shia, Druze, Maronite, Orthodox, Catholic. Prior to the Israeli invasion, the Shia had largely been, in truth, a non-factor in the country. Syria to the east, it's a Sunni country. The Syrians had supported the Sunni PLO. The Shia were also rans. But as we're going to see, one of the unintended consequences of this invasion was the elevation of the Shia into a powerful political and military force. That force is the Party of God, Hezbollah. We'll get to that in a moment. Let's look now at the Israeli occupation of Lebanon between 1982 and 1985. Let's go to the tape.
On September 15, 1983, 1 year after the Sabra and Chatila massacres, Menachem Begin resigned. Israel's occupation of Lebanon continued. The PLO set up headquarters in exile. The U.S. Marines stayed in Beirut on a peacekeeping mission. But on October 23, 1983, a suicide truck bomb exploded in the Marine barracks, killing 241 American servicemen. 4 months later, the Marines withdrew. 3 years after the invasion began, Israel withdrew from Lebanon.
In the next couple of days, the Israeli army will take another major step away from the fighting that has embroiled Israel in Lebanon for so long, as the Israelis prepare to move the great bulk of their forces back across the Israeli-Lebanese border. ABC's Bob Zelnick reports on what their Lebanese adventures cost them.
Some came out to flowers and champagne. Some were greeted with song. More than 650 came home to the mournful prayer for the dead. And from the bereaved to the dead, the only gift that matters, assurance that the sacrifice was not in vain.
Every family has to do what is good for Israel, not for themselves first.
What is good for Israel was very much in the minds of the men who stormed into Lebanon 3 years ago. They went to dislodge the PLO from its base of operations in the south, to bring peace to northern Galilee.
Israel was not defeated in this war. The PLO terrorist organization were completely defeated, and they do not exist as PLO terrorist organizations anymore.
True enough, but scenes like this, the massive bombing of Beirut, affected Israelis' sense of proportion.
One of the lessons of this war is there's certainly a limitation to the use of force.
Israel tried to expel Syria from Lebanon, but the Syrians, defeated on the battlefield, never left. Today, they are the dominant force in Lebanese affairs. The massacre of Palestinians at Sabra and Chatila by Israel's Christian ally triggered the first massive anti-war demonstration in this country's history.
What is terribly important, I believe, for all democratic countries is to maintain as much as you can a national consensus on matters of life and death. I think the war of Lebanon broke our national consensus.
Pulling back from Beirut, Israel maintained occupation forces throughout South Lebanon. The result, a prolonged and brutal clash with the area's Shiites, sapping the morale of Israel's proud, largely reservist army.
We managed to turn friendly people against Israel by occupying them and degrading them in exactly the same way that things are done in the West Bank.
Keeping Israeli troops in Lebanon has also been costly in financial terms, contributing to the country's rampaging inflation. At some sacrifice to preparedness, the Israeli army has been asked to accept cuts in equipment and personnel. The war has brought northern Galilee 3 years of quiet, but many residents fear it will not last.
It's a very paradoxical situation. The forces are coming back, and yet the anxiety is now what will happen, because there's no peace.
The Israelis retain a so-called security zone running 5 to 12 miles on the Lebanese side of the border. But the range of Katyusha rockets is 25 miles, leaving northern communities vulnerable to attack. Ditch running the entire length of the border serves as a barrier to car bombs. An electrified fence is one more buffer. But the Israelis have warned residents that if terror returns, they'll be back in force.
They will be the first to suffer. Their homes will be blown up. They will not be able to live in their villages, and they'll have to run away.